My son-in-law asked me to pass the butter at dinner one evening, and I did, politely, with a smile. That was the last nice thing I did for him. Let me back up. My name is Eleanor. I'm 69 years old, and for most of my adult life, I prided myself on being the kind of woman who doesn't ask for help. I raised two children mostly on my own after my husband Raymond passed from a heart attack when I was 52. I kept the house in Dayton. I kept my part-time bookkeeping job at a dental practice. I kept going, the way you do when there's no other choice and nobody's going to do it for you. My daughter Lily had been asking me to come live with her for almost 2 years before I finally said yes. She lives in Scottsdale, Arizona, with her husband Craig and their two kids, Owen, who's 11, and little Nora, who just turned 8. Lily called every Sunday. She'd say, "Mom, the guest room is just sitting there. The kids miss you. It doesn't make sense for you to be in that big house alone." I always said no. I liked my house. I liked my neighborhood. I liked being able to eat cereal for dinner if I felt like it and not explain myself to anyone. But then my knees started giving me trouble. Then the furnace went out in January and the repair bill was almost $4,000. Then I slipped on the back porch steps in February. Just a bruise, nothing broken, but it frightened me more than I let on. I sat on the cold concrete for a few minutes before I got up, and the whole time I thought, there is no one coming. If something happens to you here, no one will know until Sunday. So in March, I sold the house. I got a decent price for it. The market had been good, and I paid off the mortgage years ago. After everything settled, I had a little over $230,000 sitting in a savings account. I didn't tell Lily the exact amount. I just said I'd done well enough and that I was comfortable. That was true. I flew to Scottsdale with 3 suitcases and a box of books I couldn't part with, and Lily hugged me at the airport so hard I could feel it in my ribs. The kids made a banner. Owen had spelled grandma wrong. He'd written Granda, and I kept that banner for months. The first few weeks were lovely. I helped with school pickups. I made my grandmother's chicken and dumplings on Sundays. I read to Nora before bed. Craig seemed fine, a little quiet with me, a little formal, but I didn't read much into it. Some people just take time. Then something shifted. I'm not sure exactly when. It happened the way water damage happens, slowly, invisibly, until one day you notice the ceiling and realize it's been happening for a long time. Craig started making comments, small ones at first. He'd mention, in a tone that wasn't quite a joke, that the grocery bill had gone up. He'd say things like, "It's a full house now," when he came home from work, dropping his bag with a little more weight than necessary. Once, when I accidentally left a light on in the guest room, he mentioned it at dinner, not to me directly, to Lily. While I was sitting right there, Lily would change the subject. I could see it in her face, the discomfort, the way she'd reach for something to say that smoothed everything over. She loved us both and didn't want a war. I understood that. I didn't want a war either, but I started to feel it. That particular feeling of being somewhere you're not entirely wanted, of taking up space that someone else is measuring. I tried to be useful. I offered to pay for groceries some weeks. I babysat whenever they wanted a night out. I stayed out of the main living areas in the evenings so Craig could decompress in his own home. I ate breakfast early and cleaned up after myself with the thoroughness of a guest at a hotel. I was so careful. I was so careful, and it still wasn't enough. It was a Tuesday in October. Lily was at her book club. Craig had put the kids to bed, and I was reading in the guest room with the door half open. He knocked. I said, "Come in." He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, not aggressive but not warm, and he said, "Eleanor, I think we need to have an honest conversation." I put my book down. He said that he and Lily had talked, and they felt like the arrangement had become, and he paused here, choosing his word, permanent in a way they hadn't anticipated. He said they loved me, of course. He said the kids adored me. And then he said, "But we didn't sign up to run a retirement home. Lily and I need our space back. We need to know, what's the plan here? What are you thinking about moving out?" I looked at him for a moment. Then I said very quietly, "I'll figure something out." He nodded, relieved, and said, "We just want to be on the same page." Then he went back downstairs. I closed the guest room door, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the carpet for a long time. I want to tell you I felt angry, and I did, eventually. But the first thing I felt was something older and heavier than anger. Something that goes back to being a little girl and understanding, in that wordless way children understand things, that you can be somewhere and still not fully belong. I hadn't felt that feeling in decades. I didn't appreciate its return. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I drove to a coffee shop a few miles from the house, ordered a large coffee, sat in the corner booth, and I thought. I did the kind of thinking you can only do alone, without anyone's eyes on you. I thought about my options. I thought about what I actually had. And slowly, as I sat there, the fog started to lift. $230,000. My own money. Money no one knew the full extent of. I'd also, in the months before selling the house, done something I'd been meaning to do for years. I'd gone through Raymond's old files, really gone through them, and found a life insurance policy I'd half forgotten about. It was a small policy, not enormous, but it had been sitting there accumulating interest for 17 years, and when I finally called the insurance company, the payout was just over $68,000. I hadn't spent a cent of it. I hadn't known what to do with it yet. It was sitting in a separate account, also in my name, also something I hadn't mentioned to anyone. Just under $300,000 total between the two accounts. I opened my phone and I started looking at property listings, not because I had any real plan, not yet, but because looking felt better than not looking, because doing something, anything, felt better than sitting on that bed staring at carpet. I started slow. I looked at senior apartments in the Scottsdale area. Nice ones, not the depressing kind. Places with pools and activity rooms and their own dining areas. They cost more than I expected, but the numbers weren't impossible. Then I looked further. I had a friend from my church back in Dayton. Her name is Gwen, and she'd moved to a 55 plus community outside of Tucson about 3 years ago. She'd told me about it once over the phone, and I'd half listened, the way you half listen when something doesn't seem relevant to your life yet. I called her that week. "Eleanor," she said, "I've been telling you about this place for years." "Tell me again," I said. "Tell me everything." She told me. It was a community called Copper Ridge. Newer construction, about 45 minutes from Tucson, with a clubhouse, a pool, tennis courts, a small gym. Not a nursing home. She was very clear about that. Independent living for people who didn't want to be dependent on anyone. The homes were single story, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, attached garage, small yard. She'd paid just over $210,000 for hers 2 years ago, and the HOA fees were reasonable. I went to visit her the following week while Craig was at work and Lily was at the kids' school for a parent-teacher conference. I told Lily I was going to see an old friend, which was true. Gwen met me at the gate with a golf cart and a thermos of coffee, which is the most her thing possible, and she drove me around the whole community for an hour. It was a warm day in October, the kind of Arizona warm that's actually pleasant, not the suffocating heat of July, and the whole place was clean and quiet and full of people walking dogs and riding bikes and just living their lives without anyone asking them when they planned to leave. I stood outside a model home with my coffee and thought, I want this. Not the specific house, not even the specific community necessarily, just this. A place that was mine. A door I could close that belonged to me. A morning coffee on a patio that no one else was measuring. That afternoon, I called a real estate agent. Her name was Barbara, and she was matter of fact and efficient in a way I deeply appreciated. I told her my budget. I told her what I was looking for. I told her I wanted to move quickly. She said, I have 2 listings you need to see this week. I saw them Thursday. The first one was fine. The second one, I knew before I'd made it to the kitchen. It was a 3 bedroom on a quiet cul-de-sac near the back of the community. Big windows, a covered patio, a small citrus tree in the backyard that had tangerines growing on it like it was just doing that naturally, for fun, because it could. The previous owners had redone the kitchen, good lighting throughout, a second bedroom big enough for when Owen and Nora came to stay. I told Barbara I wanted to make an offer that afternoon. Before I did, I called my attorney. His name is Frank, and I'd used him years ago for Raymond's estate. He walked me through everything: the purchase process, what to watch for, how to structure the title. He also, unprompted, said something that stuck with me. He said, Eleanor, I'd recommend you keep the financial details of this purchase private until everything is finalized. Disclosure has a way of complicating things. I don't know what he meant specifically, and I didn't ask, but I heard it. I made the offer. It was accepted within 24 hours. I didn't tell Lily. Not yet. I want to be clear that this was the hardest part, not the paperwork, not the logistics, not even the grief of knowing I was starting over somewhere new at 69. The hardest part was sitting across from my daughter at dinner, watching her laugh at something Owen said, and carrying this enormous secret and not knowing what it would do to us. She's my daughter. She didn't say those words to me. She didn't ask me when I was leaving. I know that. I knew it then. But she'd let someone else say it, and she'd let him stand in that doorway, and she'd let me sit in that room afterward alone, and she hadn't knocked on my door that night to ask if I was okay. Maybe she didn't know how. Maybe she was trying to keep the peace. I've been a mother. I understand impossible positions. But I was also, at that particular moment, a 69-year-old woman sitting on a guest room bed at 10 o'clock at night, trying to figure out where she belonged, and nobody came, so I carried the secret. The closing was set for 3 weeks out. In that time, I was calm. I was pleasant at dinner. I helped with homework. I made Nora's Halloween costume. She wanted to be a butterfly, and we worked on it together at the kitchen table for 2 evenings, cutting and gluing and covering everything in gold glitter. I was present. I was myself. I just also had a secret. 2 days before the closing, I told Lily, not Craig, Lily. I asked her to come sit with me on the back patio after the kids were in bed. She brought out 2 glasses of iced tea, and we sat under the stars, which you can actually see in Scottsdale if you get away from the street lights, and I told her everything: the house sale, the insurance policy, the money, the community, the home with the tangerine tree. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Mom, why didn't you tell me? I looked at her. I didn't say, because your husband asked me when I was leaving as if I were a house guest who'd overstayed. I didn't say that, but I think she heard it anyway in the silence. I needed to do this myself, I said. I needed to know I could. She set down her glass and she cried a little, quietly, and I held her hand across the table, and neither of us said a lot more than that. Some things don't need a lot of words. She helped me pack. Craig was polite about it in the way that people are polite when they've gotten what they wanted and feel slightly guilty about it. He carried boxes to my car. He shook my hand at the end, which told me everything I needed to know about where we stood. I moved in on a Friday in November. Gwen was there with champagne she'd gotten from Costco, which I respected. We sat on my covered patio. My patio, those words still feel extraordinary. And we drank champagne out of plastic cups and watched the light change on the mountains in the distance. I can see a small slice of mountains from my backyard if I sit in the right chair. I have sat in that chair every single morning since I moved in. I want to tell you about the first morning, though, because I've thought about it so many times. I woke up at 6:15. I didn't set an alarm. My body just knew. I made coffee in my own kitchen with my own coffee maker. I put on my robe. Not a guest robe, my robe. The old soft one Lily gave me 3 Christmases ago, and I carried my coffee out to the patio and I sat down and I did not think about anyone's schedule or whether the light in my room was on or whether I was taking up too much space in a house that wasn't mine. I just drank my coffee. A road runner crossed the far end of my yard, which felt like some kind of sign, though I'm not sure of what. I sat there for a long time. In the months since I've moved in, I joined a morning walking group that meets at 7 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. 4 women and 1 man named Douglas, who used to teach high school history and has opinions about everything, which makes him excellent company. I take a water aerobics class on Wednesdays. I started a small book club in my own home, 6 of us, and we meet on the first Monday of each month and drink a little too much wine and argue about whether the endings are satisfying. Last month, Gwen said the ending of the book we'd read was a cop out, and we debated it for 45 minutes. It was the best evening I'd had in years. Owen and Nora came to visit in February, just the 2 of them for a long weekend, while Lily and Craig had a trip planned. They slept in the second bedroom that I'd set up specifically for them. Owen discovered there was a community pool and spent most of Saturday afternoon in it. Nora helped me pick tangerines from the backyard tree, and we made juice badly with a hand juicer I bought at a kitchen store, and it took us an hour to get about 2 cups of juice. And she thought the whole thing was wonderful. I set up education accounts for both of them, a 5x9 for each with a meaningful amount seeded into each one. I did this quietly through my attorney, and I structured the accounts so the distributions go directly toward qualifying education expenses and bypass Craig and Lily's household finances entirely. Frank helped me sort the language. Owen can use his for college or for trade school or for whatever he decides to do with his life. It's his. Nora's too. That part made me cry a little, actually, sitting in Frank's office reviewing the paperwork. Not sad crying, the other kind. I called Lily one Sunday in March, the same day she's always called me, and she answered on the second ring the way she always has. We talked for an hour. She told me about the kids, about a work project she was stressed about a book she was reading. I told her about Douglas's opinions on the most recent thing. Douglas had opinions about, and she laughed in a way I hadn't heard in a while. At the end of the call, she said, "Mom, are you happy there?" I looked out my window at the backyard, at the citrus tree, at the slice of mountains in the distance. "Yes," I said, "I really am." She was quiet for just a second, and then she said, "I'm glad, Mom. I'm really glad." I think she meant it. I think she understood something she hadn't fully understood before, that her mother was not something to be managed or accommodated or worried about from a comfortable distance. I was a person who could figure things out. I always had been. I just had to go somewhere quiet enough to remember it. I'm not going to tell you I don't have hard days. I do. Some mornings I wake up and the house is very quiet and I feel Raymond's absence the way you feel a tooth that's been pulled. Not exactly pain, but a gap where something used to be. There are evenings when I make dinner for one and I think about how different everything looked 20 years ago, and the thinking sits heavy for a while before it passes. But then I put on my walking shoes and I go. Or I call Gwen, or I sit on my patio with my coffee and let the morning do what mornings do. I have not asked anyone's permission to turn on a light. I have not calculated whether my presence is costing too much. I have not sat on the edge of a bed in the dark wondering where I belonged. The tangerine tree is already heavy again this fall. I've been promised by my neighbor Dolores, who has lived here for 6 years and knows everything about desert gardening, that I'll have more tangerines than I know what to do with by December. She says she'll bring her juicer, a real one, electric, not the little hand contraption I tortured Nora with, and we'll make a proper batch. I'm looking forward to it. That's the thing about starting over at 69. People act like it's a closing, a winding down, a settling into something smaller. And maybe for some people it is. But for me, it has felt improbably and profoundly like a beginning. I have a door. I close it at night. I open it in the morning when I'm ready. That is everything. I've been sitting with this story long enough now to see it clearly, not just what happened, but why it had to happen the way it did. Craig didn't push me out. Not really. He just said out loud what I'd been sensing for months, and sometimes that's actually the most useful thing a person can do for you, even when they don't mean it that way. His words stung because they were honest, and honest things usually do sting, at least at first. But what he gave me, standing in that doorway with his arms crossed, was the one thing I'd been avoiding for 2 years. A reason to stop waiting and start deciding. I think that's worth sitting with for a moment, because the easiest version of this story is that Craig was the villain and I was the victim, and everything that followed was my revenge. But that's not how I actually feel about it. The real story is about what I almost let happen to myself. I had $300,000 and a whole life left to live, and I was folding myself into a guest room, eating breakfast early so I wouldn't be in anyone's way. Not because I had no choice. Because I was afraid. Afraid of the expense, of the loneliness, of starting over at 69 and getting it wrong. Fear is funny that way. It dresses itself up as practicality. It calls itself caution. And before you know it, you're apologizing for turning on a light in a house that isn't yours. What I know now is that the way other people treat you is almost always a direct reflection of what you've silently agreed to accept. I don't mean that cruelly. I'm not blaming myself for Craig's rudeness. But I had walked into that house and made myself small, and small is what I got treated as. The moment I stopped being small, the moment I sat in that coffee shop and opened a real estate app and started actually looking, everything began to change. Not because the world changed, because I did. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. The world will absolutely let you shrink if you allow it. It won't stop you. It won't intervene. Your own family, the people who love you, will sometimes unconsciously press against the space you occupy just to see if you'll give ground, and the answer has to come from you. Nobody else can hold that line. I think about Lily sometimes in this. She's a good daughter. She loves me genuinely. But love isn't always the same as courage. And she didn't have the courage in that season to stand up in her own house and say that her mother deserved better. I hope she's learned something from watching me. I hope Owen and Nora grow up understanding that the people who raised you don't stop being whole people when they get older. I set up those education accounts partly for their futures, yes, but also, honestly, because I wanted them to see that their grandmother made choices from a place of strength and generosity, not bitterness. What you model matters. How you carry yourself in the hard moments is what the people watching you will remember long after the details have faded. I don't carry any anger about what happened. Not anymore. What I carry instead is something that took me 69 years to fully own, the understanding that my life belongs to me, that starting over isn't a failure, that a door you can close and open on your own terms is not a small thing. It is, in fact, everything.